Why does everything take so long? Right, before I begin, can I make it clear? I love my family very much. I have no intentions of ever leaving them. I don't know what I'm touching on or who's listening, but I have that in writing as well. If you know, you know. You don't, you don't. Whatever. Let's not over dramatise it. Yeah. So, prelude to the drama. One thing you're never going to get from me is these cheesy...
Don't forget to hit likes and subscribe to the channel.
I don't do none of that. No. And don't expect all of these, massive great setups and things, because I don't do that either. I mean, it's just taken me about 3 hours just to get the lighting right. I still don't know what the fuck I'm doing with it. But hey ho, doesn't matter. You've not come here to listen to me go on. So, we're talking about the roots of mind control. That's kind of where we've got to start in this story. I wish it was a storybook. It's not, and sorry, I'm just seeing a lot of orbs. That's dust. Right, okay, so I am under a bit of pressure at the moment. I do feel a little bit unsafe because I have kind of entered the cave of webs, and I don't know if I want to find a house spider or a tarantula. One thing I do know is that right, roll it 2 minutes in. Shut the fuck up, Remy. Alright, so mind control, it dates back to the Egyptian Book of the Dead. A lot of people watching this will be like, oh, you already know that. But, don't be ignorant. There's a lot of people that are just waking up to this, which is why we've kind of got to go back to basics. And to be honest, I thought I knew it all, and then I started digging and digging, and I really didn't. Like, the scale of this is just huge. Huge. So, anyway, Egyptian Book of the Dead, ancient Egypt, it was basically a manual on how to fracture the mind, which is essentially what trauma-based mind control is on a personal level, so with a perpetrator and a victim. But in order to connect all of this to the trafficking with Epstein, fucking monster, whatever his name is, we have to go back in time. So, a little bit historical. I've tried to make it as interesting as I can, even though I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to making films. Right, so the Egyptian Book of the Dead, it formed, if you like, what you could call a mystery religion. So, secret societies, occults, that kind of thing, but they were like offshoots all over the world. And in 1776, a Bavarian Jesuit was commissioned by the House of Rothschild. His name was Adam Weishaupt, and they wanted him to centralise, so bring together all of the mystery religion societies, if you will. So like bring them all together. And so, that was the occult bloodlines, Masonic fraternities and elite societies. This unification formed what is now known today as the Illuminati. And just a little lesson, it translates to Illuminati, the enlightened ones, because they have the knowledge of the mystery religion from Babylon, whatever. It's fucking disgusting. Anyway, so you can imagine you've got these guys, yeah, they're all like little secret societies. I mean, I'm underplaying it a little bit, aren't I, because they're evil and sick, but they're in the little group and they decide, right, we want complete and utter control of the world. The golem that are walking around are just levels, let's use them, let's have complete and utter control over them. And this is how it began. So, we're in the 19th century now, and Brittany and Germany were recognised as, the primary geographical areas of the Illuminati activity. And that's due to the interest in social psychology and behavioural studies based in the Kaiser Institute in Germany. And also with if you look into Theodore Roos, he basically was trying to start the Church of Satan, but Alice Crowley took it. But we're not here for that. If you want to look into Crowley and Roos, you can. But this is how we know that it was operating in England and in Germany at that time. Anyway, going back about a decade, 1882, we have the behavioural science research is just beginning in Britain, and I think they're kind of inspired by Germany. I'll send you some freaky video I found. I won't send it, I'll play it, about the Kaiser Institute. It was just weird stuff.
The emergence of biological science provides man with a new perspective on life. The concept of degeneration now has an optimistic antithesis. Biology as the redeemer of the Western world. The whole world is in bloom, and even art conveys the message. Science seems not only to offer an understanding of nature, but also the ability to intervene and adjust. Everything is biology, and like man himself, society is an organism ruled by its laws.
Behavioural science started at Wellington House. Now what they did is mega. They, in 1915, while the world was fixated on chaos and war, Wellington House, it was pushing propaganda on a scale that is really hard to comprehend. By June that year, they had produced over 2.5 million pieces of propaganda in the form of books, posters, articles, pamphlets. In 17 different languages. So that's 17 different ways to shape perception globally. This was in 1915. So can you imagine what they're doing now? Anyway, well, we already know, don't we? But I digress. So by February 1916, that number exploded to 7 million copies. And it was very clever the way they did it, because they did it through unofficial channels, so that it wouldn't come back to government. So it was through, like voluntary organisations, private mailing lists, that was a big one, and trusted institutions. And it was incredibly clever, and I think they're still doing it around about that way now through family foundations, but we'll get to that. Sir Gilbert Parker, he was placed in America, and he was doing the work of Wellington House from there. And what he actually did, he formed a mailing list in America. So back then you had a mailing list, so you'd send out all your propaganda, all your news, things like that, to people's houses. Anyway, he formed a mailing list, and it had over 160,000 names on it, and he supplied propaganda material to over 500 newspapers in America. This is while we are in Britain handing out pamphlets in 17 different languages. What the fuck? Can you imagine the impact that this had? More importantly, if this was achieved then, they basically rewrote history. It only takes, I think they say 100 years it takes. I digress again. So we're now on to, so Wellington House, it operated for a long time, covertly. It was disclosed in a magazine expose by someone called John Coleman, I think. But people have claimed to have been the author behind the expose, but it doesn't really matter, it makes no difference. So until near the end of the war, very few people knew how the lightings changed. Anyway, very few people knew that behind the headlines, there existed a coordinated propaganda apparatus operating in plain sight, and they evolved, they refined, systematized, and exported. Edward Bernays, enters Edward Bernays, a man often referred to as the father of public relations, the father of PR, drawing on the work of his uncle Freud, Sigmund Freud, the psychiatrist. Bernays understood something fundamental. People do not make decisions rationally, but they respond to emotion. They saw that through the propaganda experiments at Wellington House. They respond to suggestion, to influence, and he applied wartime propaganda techniques, which we've just been talking about, advertising, politics, media, shaping public opinion, without the public ever realising it. But he didn't call it manipulation, he called it the engineering of consent. We could talk about that all night, couldn't we? 1940s now, Tavistock has... I think Tavistock was operating out of Wellington House, but this is my personal opinion. I think that when they were exposed for what they were doing, they had to like form a separate institute that was separate from that. Although it did stem from Wellington House, this is proven fact, but they just moved and renamed it as the Tavistock Institute on Human Relations, and they began to study the human mind, scale from individuals to entire populations. Morale, fear, obedience, breakdown, no longer abstract ideas but measurable variables. I mean, how fucking sick. Rudolf Hess, Nazi war criminal, he was the deputy Führer in World War II. Somehow he managed to jump on a plane and go to Scotland after the war, and no one really understood how he managed to do it. Well, the person that was heading the Tavistock Institute, Sir Colonel John Rawlin Rees, he was a key figure in military psychiatry and the Tavistock movement. He claimed, or there's alleged accounts, that he actually took Rudolf Hess and he was under the British military at Tavistock, and they were drugging him, they were playing with, experimenting on him, studying him. So there's that. But psychological warfare, it was becoming increasingly sophisticated. Now, here's the interesting thing. Well, there's a few interesting things here, actually. Kurt Lewin, he was known as the father of social psychology. Dr. Kurt Lewin. He was a professor at the University of Berlin, and then he went on to live in America. But what doesn't fit for me is that he was actually a founder with Colonel John Rawlin Rees, but a shadow founder. So he was running it, but not running it from there. Does that make sense? And what was I going to say? I think it was about a year after the Tavistock Institute opened formally, he died. Strange. We'll come back to him. So there was then the Cold War in Vietnam, which was just, I think, was it Operation Phoenix? That was a psychological warfare experiment. And the soldiers that came back from that horrific trauma, they were taken to Tavistock and they were experimented on with their PTSD. They just wanted to like, pull apart the mechanics of fear and terror, and whether they could invoke amnesia. I'll play a short clip. I hope it's not. But Colonel Rees, he had a friend. His name was Dr. Christopher Chomes Brock. Very important, this now. Bearing in mind that Colonel Rees, well, that's strange, it seems to have disappeared. He committed these atrocities on, soldiers and experimented. He was basically an expert in psychological warfare, but like military, like you don't want to fuck with him. So anyway, his friend Christopher, he's not called Christopher, it's called George. Sorry, George Brock Chisholm. Right. Now, he said that the world was sick and the ills from which it was suffering were mainly due to the perversion of man and his ability in George Brock Chisholm, and he said that the world was sick and the ills from which it was suffering were mainly due to the perversion of man, his inability to live at peace with himself. His ideology was that psychiatrists should take it upon themselves to rid the population of the concept of good and evil. So, in other words, the way that I look at that and I see that is that he was trying to blur the lines between right and wrong. Now, Brock was the brains behind the International Council for Mental Hygiene. Now, at one of these conferences, allegedly, sorry, I missed out the important bit, Colonel Rees, who was heading the Tavistock Institute in London, he actually helped Brock set up the International Council for Mental Hygiene at the same time. And I think this was somewhere else in the world. Anyway, at one of these conferences, I think it was like 19, gives a fuck anyway, he said that openly he confessed to this council. He said, "I've managed to achieve to influence and infiltrate the news and the schools and the education system and the churches, but it's going to prove a little bit harder to infiltrate law and medicine. This was in like 1932, I think. I'm pretty sure it was 1932. But he said this openly. Right, here comes the crux. Yeah, I want you to go to the World Mental Health Organization, the World Mental Health, oh my goodness gracious me, the World Mental Health Foundation, WHMF. It evolved from the International Council of Hygiene, created by Brock and Colonel Rees, and they openly admit it on their website. And it was that same organisation that actually created the World Health Organization. And Brock was the first director of the World Health Organization in 1945. It was a year later that Kurt Lewin died. Interesting, maybe not. So, now we kind of we're in a position to move towards the MK Ultra stuff. What Kurt Lewin, he was actually, I think he might have been alright, but his work was misconstrued and misused by Colonel Rees, because it was Colonel Rees that, so basically Kurt Lewin, he created this theory of observation and change. I mean, it's a theory, it's in social psychology, you know, and but it was Colonel Rees that he created the problem, reaction, solution, which is, you know, how they maintain control. Create the problem, they wait for the reaction, and then they offer the solution. So constantly dependent on them. Yeah, if you're dependent on something, you are not in control. We are dependent on the government. It's not even the government though, is it really? What Brock said, oh no, it was Rees that said it. He said it was an agenda to get to achieve fascism with the face of diplomacy. That's exactly what this is, what we're living in right now. It is fascism. It always has been. There's nothing diplomatic about it. So I'm going to take a break now. Probably going to take me about 10 hours just to edit this. Actually, it's 24 minutes. I've done well. But yeah, I feel a bit freaked about what's about to come. The money trail with Epstein and the Tavistock, and some names, new information, new proof that all points to something really quite nefarious, but simple. And I want to make it clear now, I'm making this video in the hopes that people will watch it and not label it as conspiracy. I'm trying to make it as factual as I can, so that it is seen by a wider audience. Because let's be honest, for years and years, the people that have known what's been going on have been pushed in the tinfoil hat corner of the internet or the world. And it's kind of pissing me off in a way that people are just starting to discuss it now, like it's new stuff. When are we going to talk about Max? Is anyone going to talk about Max? Because I've got a lot to say about Max. And I think a lot of the stuff that he said can be validated in the Epstein files. For example, he said that he mentioned the Neptune Society, one of the bases. Well, the Neptune Society is in the Epstein files, so he didn't make it up.
One morning, I got a letter in the mail, and the letter was addressed to me, and it was from something called the Neptune Society. And I'd never...
Max Spiers. I suggest you get familiar with him. I mean, it's pretty out there stuff, but I don't doubt a word of what he said. And, you know, he was taken out, he was killed, he was about to release a list of names to do with the Spartacus Club and the Elm Guest House. He was about to spill the beans on all these paedophile, fucking disgusting twats. And they killed him. And then they made a BBC documentary, Properganda, to say that, well, he was a drug addict anyway, and because he talked about UFOs, so he was mad. He never talked about UFOs. Not the way that they portrayed it, you know. He'd have so much to say about what was going on right now. He really would. And it, you know, can we please not forget about Max? For those of you that have been around the block, that have been on this journey, you know. I also advise that you subscribe to Basis TV. A lot of the Basis project, it got took off YouTube. It was just too much information they didn't really want to get out. So, you know, Miles is not making a lot of money from it at all. and he's trying so hard to spread awareness, truth, people's testimonies. So he's slowly getting it back on YouTube, but all of the old school stuff, all of the important stuff, I think, is on Basis TV. It costs £3.80 a month, and there are hundreds and hundreds of mind-blowing interviews that they're just golden. So, you know, I think you should. It's not a lot of money to pay, and I highly recommend having a look. And yeah, so in the next episode we're gonna talk about MK Ultra, trauma-based mind control, and I'm gonna give you a preview of some of the documents that I found that prove that Epstein was invested in the Tavistock group, and I have got emails to prove that Peter Mandelson and himself were working ahead of the family foundation that sponsored the Tavistock group. I will also prove to you, well, I'm telling too much now, aren't I? Anyway, thank you, and I'll see you soon.
Your television, mainstream media is pushing more and more for people to empathize with the sociopath in television and movies, and they'll create a movie or a TV show where Dexter is like a prime example, where you'll have, and he's a serial killer, but somehow the writing will be done where you'll empathize and you think, oh, he's not so bad, you know, it's fine. I like this guy, and so you'll end up having a connection with him, although he is torturing and killing people. So that's kind of altering the mainstream collective mind in a more leaning it towards a more cutthroat, sell out sort of mode. And I think,
okay, these are the details.